Hello, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. Good morning to you.
Um, let's go ahead and get started and dive right in. Tell me about your business, One Digital.
Well, One Digital is the largest national benefits insurance firm in the country, and they have an HR consulting segment as part of their model. And because HR and benefits sort of overlap, my background is I started an HR consulting firm over 20 years ago, and so it's been a really good fit for us to be part of the One Digital team.
Sweet. All right. And what would you say is a specific problem that you solve for the people you serve?
Well, companies of have all different types of initiatives. They have different mindsets on how they want to run their company. So our challenge is always to align with the company's objectives.
Okay. And is in lining with their objectives, but was it like, is there a specific challenge that they often have that you guys are helping them with?
It ranges from compliance to culture to retention. It really is across the board. I would say now we have a lot more inquiries about retaining employees, finding good employees, addressing more consistent culture within the company.
Got it. Got it. These are all hot topics. Now,
Yeah.
one of the things I know that you addressed often with your clients these days is an inclusive working environment, and I'm sure that helps with the retention aspect of it. So, just so we are all on the same page, what is an inclusive environment, and how does it help companies deliver remarkable experiences to their customers?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. An inclusive environment touches on many areas. It includes various demographics. It includes communication. Um, it includes people at all different levels that have some knowledge of how the company should or is being run, and it allows voices from every level to be heard within the company. I think that creates a sort of ownership of your job and how you conduct yourself that the customer experience is enhanced by, rather than, well, I don't know, this is how they do things. Those kinds of answers are not going to create a great customer experience, obviously.
Got it. Got it. Now, just about every company these days will say something like, "We foster diverse and inclusive. We're all about diversity and inclusion. This is part of our values." But a lot of people actually struggle to live that in practice. It's one thing to say it, it's another one to have a culture that actually embodies it. Why do you feel that so many companies struggle with this from your experience?
Well, I think that having a thoughtful company is a challenge. Your primary objective on a day-to-day basis is profitability. So a lot of companies are just driven towards bottom line types of decision making. And let's face it, a company is a compilation of just people that have different life experiences, different values. So for people to be thoughtful is sometimes a challenge when you have a busy job that's just demanding on a day-to-day basis. Companies don't often take time out, set aside a day or 2 days to retreat and really discuss who are we, where are we going, what are we trying to achieve.
Got it. Now, you say, a company is made up of individuals, and I do think that sometimes people forget that, right? Each employee is a human, it's or a person. Is it difficult to get the people that you're hiring to adopt the values of the company if they feel like maybe they've never thought about this in particular whenever they're coming to work for a company, but maybe they have different values? Is that something that you feel can be changed with training, or is it just something that this is how you operate when you're here operating on behalf of our company, and what you do in your own time is your own thing?
Well, I think a lot of times companies, as you pointed out in your previous question, companies want to say what they do and what
Right.
they are, but the employee experience is what they actually do.
Hmm.
And that really is what culture is. It's not what you say your culture is, it's what the employee experience is as
Right.
to what your culture really is. But I think employees are hungry to be a part of something that they want to embrace. So when an employee, a new employee, as you just asked in this question, a new employee comes on board, how do you get them integrated into hopefully a healthy company culture? It really falls on all of the other employees and to some extent the managers to help shepherd that employee in the right direction by saying those aren't the kind of things that we say here, that isn't the way we behave here. So you begin identifying who you are as a company by the voices of your employees, and employees want to then participate in that.
Got it. No, I love it. I love the way you describe that. Now, a lot of that, getting people to adapt to the company culture that you say you want to have, because like you said, there's what you say and there's actually what people do. And a lot of getting people to do and live the values and the culture that you want to have within your company requires some training. So what would you say, from your experience over the years working with these different companies, is what a good training program might look like to get people to sort of nod their head and start to say, yeah, 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 these are values that I can live on a regular basis while I'm here at work?
Well, let me get a little bit into the history of training in the area. Originally started in harassment training. Companies were required to do that either because it was a defense. If there was a harassment complaint, the company could say, "Hey, we trained them. It's not our fault." Especially in California, was expanded to discrimination, bullying. All of that is now part of that training requirement. But I think that that is just a surface, that has just been on the surface. In other words, these are our policies. You have to behave this way. Uh, Dealing with employee behavior is fine, but their underlying belief system is what causes those blips, those Starbucks moments,
Yep.
those Roseanne moments. You can muscle your behavior requirements to a certain extent, but people's underlying beliefs will pop out. And so I think we're seeing a shift now in how or what corporate responsibility is really going to look like in order to participate in the social change that's needed.
For sure. Now, there's culture change at a social level, and there's culture change within a company, and sometimes, like you said, these things can go hand in hand. Now, a lot of times culture change is something that works well to whenever it's from happens from the top down. But sometimes, diversity, inclusion, belonging, creating these types of environments, creating these real cultures where they're embraced, sometimes it's not necessarily a company priority because they're like, we have this number to make, we've got these initiatives, yada, yada, yada. So what do you do, or what would your advice be for business leaders within a company who see that there needs to be a shift in the culture, but they don't necessarily have the full buy-in from their senior leaders? Maybe not, they're not opposed to it, but they don't have necessarily the full buy-in.
Well, let's face it, everybody has their own biases that they come to the table with. Um, what I'm seeing is that corporations are going to have to now start talking about that. There's going to have to be a discussion on it. But one of the things that my career has sort of evolved into is I often get consulting projects that are around executive level misbehavior. So I do one-on-one trainings with executives. Let's give an example: of vice president of sales, top sales producer, but he behaves badly in some way. let's say, hits on the receptionist or something and creates a harassment situation. They don't want to get rid of their top salesperson, but they have to do something about it. So I end up being the counselor to those kinds of situations. And what I've discovered through doing a lot of these counseling sessions is that if you don't deal with the core beliefs of the people at the top, it's just going to trickle down. Yeah. And I mean, I'm actually doing counseling sessions for the business owner, the CEO of companies, where maybe their attorney has recommended it because they've had a claim. And that's going to have great impact down. You can, what's happened in a lot of these, or even in Hollywood, they had policies, they trained people, but the people at the top are the ones that were the most guilty of that behavior. Mm-hmm. And people see that. Employees recognize inauthentic behavior. And so then pretty soon nobody's behaving correctly, even though the policy is written, everybody signed their documents that they were trained. But once you allow it at the highest level, it eventually becomes a virus in the company.
For sure. And I totally agree with you. So it sounds like what you're saying is you definitely need your company leadership on board, but what leaders have to do within their sphere of influence is walk the walk and talk the talk. Eventually, everybody will get on board, but what they can control is their own team and how they lead them, and they need to be able to live into what they're asking them to do.
Yeah. That is correct.
Okay. What are your suggestions on, first I'm curious if you think this is possible, but for how to gain the support of employees who aren't necessarily on board with diversity and inclusion and belonging, especially if they feel threatened by them? Because I know this is a topic that a lot of people don't necessarily want to talk about, but it's popping up, and it's popping up a lot. So how should leaders start to address this?
Well, I think they have to make it more visible in the company, for one thing. But training needs to change. It can't just be espousing what the policy is and what the requirements is. You have to bring people to a level of awareness of what the impact is. For example, everybody would agree that we need an even playing field. But until people really understand that we don't have an even playing field and how they participate in perpetuating that, so then there's not going to be real change or awareness. So your training now has to include real discussion about and real interaction about that playing field and how that looks in environments and how people respond to that when they're on the low end of that playing field. So those kind of examples can even be done with simple games where imagine, I'm sure you've played Monopoly before. Imagine when you start the Monopoly game, different players are given different amounts of money instead of everybody getting, $5 $10 bills and 3 $5 bills and all of that. If people got different amounts, the playing field is not even. They're going to have certain advantages. So I think those kinds of examples can really start to bring a different level of awareness for employees to recognize what they know is right. There should be an even playing field.
For sure. Are there any specific recommendations that you would give employees or leaders of these teams for what their specific role should be in rallying diversity and supporting, creating a diverse and inclusive work environment? Because everybody has a role to play, right? So what are your thoughts on getting people to embrace theirs?
But, as you've already identified, leadership has to be there. And we're seeing in the HR industry, we're seeing titles change to people and culture and other kinds of contemporary terms to recognize that someone needs to be in charge of continuing to put this in front of everybody. So employees don't fall back into their default of the biases that they learned growing up or whatever, but that it's constantly in front of them. And so when it's somebody's assignment, I think everybody will I think things can actually change when it's in front of you all the time, when it's at a component of every staff meeting, when there are changing signs, when there are rewards and incentives and things that are all part of a program to help instill the right culture in the company, which always will translate to health. Always translates to the bottom line.
Got it.
When a company is not healthy, the bottom line eventually starts to feel that pain.
I like that analogy because this is all about the health of your company, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
now, how once a company starts engaging in these efforts to transform their culture to be one that's diverse and inclusive, where everyone feels like they belong, how will they know that it's working or that they're making any progress? Because I imagine that these are going to get difficult and uncomfortable, and maybe they might feel like it's not working at all. So how do they know when they're moving the needle in the right direction?
Well, companies for a long time have done employee satisfaction surveys, and I think that's still a very useful tool. But it's the questions that are asked in the satisfaction survey that need to change and need to be more raw, more open, more direct to these types of issues. But I also like random interviews. I know that sounds a little awkward, but if imagine in a company you have a chief culture officer, okay? And their job is to monitor and make sure that things are on track and continuing to be progressive and moving in a good direction, in a healthy direction. To be tapped and say, I'd like to interview you today as a rank and file employee and talk to them about what your experience is, what you think we could do differently, how could you be more included. And one-on-one, people are a lot more comfortable with sharing things when they feel that it's welcome information. And so I think surveys are helpful as a whole, and it does give you data, especially in a large company. But just like they do random drug tests, I really think random check-in
Yeah,
with employees could really be powerful.
for sure. I totally agree. This has been super insightful. If people want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where can people find you?
Well, my email address, would you like that?
Sure. If you want people to connect on LinkedIn, I can put,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, my name is Sam Murray, SAMMURRAY, and I am on LinkedIn. But my email address is simply smurray@onedigital.com.
Sweet. And I'll put that info in the show notes in case people want to reach out and they want to find you easily.
Yeah, I'd be happy to help direct them to a solution that will help them with what they're trying to achieve.
Awesome. Well, any parting words of wisdom for business leaders who want to create a culture of inclusion within their business so that they are able to be a healthy company to deliver those remarkable experiences to their customers?
Well, I guess in summary, I would say to business leaders, recognize that things are changing and corporations are going to have and are already starting to have a different kind of social responsibility than they have had in the past. It's not just charitable, but they really are going to be held, and because of their own liability, they're going to be held to creating environments where bias is minimized and healthy views of the world that we live in exist. And that is going to be a big responsibility, and it's going to require an ethical balance to how they use that responsibility. It's sort of scary putting that in the hands of corporations in a way. We've always relied on the families to provide us with our values. But I think corporations are going to be businesses in general are going to be playing a much bigger part in that role. So, but you have been delightful, and thank you so much for listening to my views and my experience in that I've gained from my career. So,
Oh,
thank you.
thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.